You wanted a job with a clear mission, flexible hours, and meaningful impact. What you got was a bird mask, a stick, and a contract that could be summarized as, walk into houses nobody else will enter and try not to become an anecdote. Congratulations. You are a medieval plague doctor, the only professional whose uniform already looks like an apology. Recruitment was easy. The city council posted a notice that said, wanted, physician, broadly defined. Competitive pay, room to negotiate, must enjoy long walks by mass graves. You applied because you were between careers, between towns, and most importantly, between attacks of common sense. They handed you a mask shaped like the world's least aerodynamic toucan, a waxed cloak, and the municipal stick with which to poke things no one wants to touch. By the time you realized the job came with prestige, but not respect, the gate had closed behind you with a sound that suggested paperwork. Your first day on the job is a tour of the human condition. You stride, squeak, through alleys that smell like a theological argument. Inside the mosque, the air is an herb garden, curated by people who think basil is armor. You breathe past a bouquet of mint, rosemary, cloves, and wishful thinking. The long beak is supposed to filter bad air, which the city council believes is simply air having a difficult year. The goggles fog instantly, so you see the world as if reality were trying to protect you from itself. Your assistant, title, whatever you survive to be, carries your ledger, which is less a list of patients and more a list of outcomes. Your first home visit goes well by your profession's standards, which is to say nobody bites you, nobody throws a chamber pot, and you successfully poke 3 buboes with your stick while murmuring in Latin that is technically Latin but spiritually jazz. You prescribe a poultice of bread, onion, and prayer. The family nods, as if they expected you to prescribe miracle. You walk outside and make the mark on the door. Your assistant writes something that will one day be called data, and even later be called art. The mask is heavy, the beak drags your neck toward the future. Children whisper, "Birdman," and giggle until their mothers shush them with the kind of shush that ends childhood. Dogs distrust you. Cats worship you because you both understand aloofness. Everyone else treats you like a coin tossed into a well, maybe lucky, probably wet. You weren't always a doctor. Few plague doctors were. Some were surgeons, some were barbers, some were men who once watched a surgeon from across a room and felt confident. The council wanted a person who could keep a ledger and not faint. You can do both. You also have a third skill. You can stand very still while bad news fills the air like smoke. This proves useful immediately. Your bosses are a committee composed of merchants who believe disease obeys economics, priests who believe disease obeys faith, and nobles who believe disease is a rumor that hasn't been informed of their bloodline. They disagree on everything except one policy. You must keep going. They pay you in coin when it exists, and bread when it doesn't. They also provide a guard who escorts you through crowds as if you are either valuable or flammable. Neither of you asks which. The canon of treatments is gloriously creative. You lance swellings and smear them with honey, because bees understand survival. You apply vinegar because vinegar understands boundaries. You burn herbs because fire understands the dramatic arts. You recommend air circulation, even though the air is the problem according to the people paying you. Then you recommend prayer, even though prayer is the problem according to the people coughing. You are a diplomat between lungs and dogma. Your stick, meanwhile, is pure pragmatism. You lift bed sheets with it, you measure distance with it, and, on delicate occasions, you remind an enthusiastic patient to remain horizontal with it. People think your mask is a talisman. You don't correct them because talismans are easier to believe in than the truth, which is, the beak does almost nothing except make you look like a respectable fever dream. But the mask does help in 2 ways. First, it stops spit, civilization's greatest invention. Second, it gives you a character. You become the bird. The bird is not afraid. The bird knocks on doors and enters the rooms where silence has settled like dust. The bird knows where to stand, and what to write, and when to say, yes, the fever sometimes leaves, which is technically not a lie. On good days, you save someone. On good days, you open a window, cool a brow, force water, bully a fever until it decides to haunt someone else. You announce, rest, and the family stares because no one in this city remembers how. On bad days, meaning most days, you arrange the room so grief can breathe. You count minutes for the living, record them for the dead, and choose words that will not splinter when they're handled by midnight. When the bell tolls, it tolls mostly for logistics. The dead must be moved at speed because time is the one thing that rots faster than flesh. You supervise trenches dug by men who have stopped believing that a trench is a line and started believing it is a mouth. You are firm with the living and careful with the dead. You wash your hands in vinegar until your skin shrugs and your nails take up philosophy. You burn your clothes and your patience in equal measure. If you weep, the mask drinks the tears and pretends not to notice. The city invents rituals to survive itself. Candles burn in windows like small, stubborn moons. Processions walk the streets sounding like hope with a hangover. Merchants sell charms shaped like hands, saints, and outcomes. The one thing nobody sells is certainty. You attend council meetings where the debate is whether to close the gates. Trade must flow, says a man who has never seen a fever. People must live, says a woman who will never again say must without reconsidering. You offer your professional opinion. The disease does not respect walls. It respects distance and luck. No one writes it down because the pen prefers famous names. Your social life is robust if you include rats. You eat separately and sleep briefly. When you do dream, you dream in the second person. You climb stairs, you open a door, you smell the moment just before a candle dies. The bird helps by making you feel like someone else's courage. In the morning you wake with creases from the mask on your face, proof that your features have begun to adapt to the shape of your job. There is an economy of gratitude. Some families press coins into your glove and whisper that God will multiply your days. Some offer bread. Some offer nothing but the look that says, "We noticed." You keep a secret stash of these looks, a currency that buys you one more house, one more bed, one more hour of being the person who arrives. Your rivals are many. There's the apothecary who sells hope by the spoonful and calls you dramatic. There's the quack who travels with a cart of laughable potions and a voice that could sell salt to the sea. There's the rumor that the plague spreads because of foreigners, witches, sinners, cats, or whichever category the speaker dislikes before breakfast. You have no time for people who set fire to scapegoats while the city burns by itself. You say so. The council coughs in bureaucratic italics. You add a line to your ledger. Education, attempted. One afternoon you are summoned to the house of a nobleman who has never used his indoor voice. He is rich in the way that makes walls taller. The moment you enter, the staff scatter like punctuation. You examine the patient, fevered, buboes like dark jewels, breath like a hot argument. The family expects miracles because their furniture is expensive. You produce competence instead. Cool cloths, water with herbs because water alone feels poor. You lance the swellings, and the nobleman howls words usually reserved for treaties. You rail at the window until it opens. Then you sit and wait because sometimes medicine is simply a verb called staying. Dawn arrives wearing the face of a butler who has not slept since his wages were invented. The fever breaks like a petition denied. The nobleman will live long enough to tell people it was his constitution. You receive a purse, surprisingly heavy. You spend most of it on food for the widow 2 streets over whose purse is surprisingly theoretical. Another day you visit the baker's house. The baker is thin in a way that contradicts her profession. She has a daughter whose laugh implies a conspiracy with sunlight. The girl is sick. You do everything you know. You do everything you don't know but pretend you do because their eyes are on you and eyes can be gravity. The fever ignores you. You stay anyway. You read the child a story through the mask in a voice that makes the words walk properly. She asks if the beak is for storing secrets. You say yes. She whispers one into it, and for an hour you remember employment can include mercy. The next morning her bed is an echo. You mark the door. You write the name. Your assistant cannot meet your eyes. You do not ask her to. The plague teaches mathematics. It teaches rates, ratios, curves that climb like gossip. It teaches how quickly a rumor can become a policy and how slowly a policy can become a habit. You learn to calculate risk like a chef counts loaves. How many houses today? How many more your lungs can manage? Whether the mask's straps will survive another hour of duty. You teach the city small arithmetic. Fewer crowds, more air, no touching, yes, washing. The city, being human, prefers subtraction of responsibility. You continue anyway because continuing is the only treatment with a 100% success rate for morale. You have colleagues in other towns. Occasionally you meet on the road like gulls in a wind. You compare notes, masks, and statistics. You tell jokes because gallows humor is cheaper than therapy and easier to sterilize. One man boasts he has discovered a cure involving red wine, garlic, and shouting at dawn. You nod politely and ask whether the shouting is essential. He says it keeps the neighbors away, which may be the only evidence-based claim you hear all week. Night patrols become part of your rhythm, not for crime, plague steals loudly, but for the dropped. You and the guard move through streets that practice being uninhabited. You listen for the small sounds, a cough unhappy to be alone, a call for water that has learned not to expect an answer. You carry a lantern that paints you as a moving rumor of daylight. Sometimes you are hailed as savior. Sometimes you are mistaken for death because death's branding department is excellent, and you use similar fonts. You do the work anyway. Religion is everywhere, like dust, like comfort, like the pause between breaths. Priests march in processions that try to shame the heavens into mercy. You walk beside them because people cannot tell the difference between miracle and survival unless both arrive together. You respect the holy because it respects grief. You kneel when asked. You rise when called. You don't argue metaphysics with the dying because the dying always win. Your own health is a negotiation. You drink boiled water that tastes like regret. You sleep sitting up so your lungs remember which way to point. You talk to your stick as if it were a colleague with excellent boundaries. When fever taps your shoulder, you stare at it like a teacher. Not today, you say. I have appointments. The fever shrugs and tries your assistant instead. You do not let it. You give her your mask and take hers, and for 3 days you are 2 birds and one will live. She does. You pretend you knew she would. The city changes. Streets empty, then slowly refill with people who believe in morning again. Shops reopen like mouths learning to smile without guilt. The bell tolls less often, and when it does, the sound feels like a memory practicing for a smaller role. The council throws you a banquet at which no one touches anything without consulting 3 committees and a prayer. They praise your service in terms that will look excellent carved into something you prefer not to be carved into yet. They pay you on time, the most miraculous of sacraments. Then they hint that your contract is complete and the mask is yours to keep. You nod, because nodding is the only safe gesture when the city decides it is finished being sick. You consider leaving. Cities are like patients. Once they recover, they forget the nurse's name. But leaving means the next city must start from zero. You decide to stay until someone younger knocks on the gate wearing a face that hasn't yet learned how heavy a beak can be. Weeks pass. A young woman arrives carrying a bag that contains more hope than linen. You train her. You teach the arithmetic, the diplomacy, the smell of a room that needs air, the weight of a silence that needs words. You hand her the stick. You keep the mask. You hope she never needs it. When the last trench is covered, and the last door is unmarked, you walk the city without the uniform and discover how many people have never seen your actual face. It's smaller than they imagined, apparently. Children who once giggled now wave as if you were a seasonal phenomenon. The baker brings you bread with a nod that counts as a ceremony. The nobleman pretends not to know you because nobility is contagious. The widow, 2 streets over, leaves a pot of stew at your doorstep with a note. For the bird, who was a person. You sit on your small steps and eat in a world that is trying to remember how. One night you take the mask to the river. You hold it in the lantern light and admire its awful genius. Inside, the herbs have turned humble. Outside, the beak is still proud. You balance it on the water, let it sail a little, catch it before it becomes a museum for fish. You think about history and its appetite for heroes with flags, not heroes with ledgers. You think about statistics and how they turn faces into fractions. You think about the houses where the air finally moves again. You decide not to throw the mask away because the future has a hobby called repeating itself. If someone were to ask whether the job was worth it, you would answer like this. It is not a good job, but it is a necessary one. It pays poorly in coin and lavishly in mornings. If they asked whether you were brave, you'd shrug because bravery is a word the living use to label the dead, and you intend, stubbornly, to remain misfiled. If they asked what the plague taught you, you'd say, how to count, how to knock, how to stay, how to leave when staying means someone else won't learn. You keep the ledger. On its last page you write 2 lines because doctors are poets who can't afford metaphors. Arrived, many. Departed, many. Stayed, we did. Morning, still possible. Then you close the book, hang the mask on a nail where it can either rest or glare at time, and step outside. The city is loud in the way only the living can be. You walk into it without the beak, without the stick, with only your ordinary human face, which is to say, with your most powerful instrument. Somewhere a bell rings for a wedding. Somewhere else a child laughs like a conspiracy with sunlight. You are late for nothing. You decide to remain so.